Very good. Thank you to everyone who is joining us this evening. We'd like to welcome you to the Palo Alto Council Candidate Forum. I'm John Keller, and I'm with Citizens Climate Lobby. Before I hand it over to our host, Susan Chamberlain, I want to go through a few housekeeping details. The display we're showing here is typical of Windows and Apple laptops. Tablet and smartphone displays are somewhat different, but provide largely the same functions. If you have technical questions, please ask them in the chat box. We'll also post questions we have ask the candidates in the chat box. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions. You can also look through the questions as posted by others and hit the thumbs up button to vote for them. We'll be selecting and consolidating questions based on their relevance and the number of votes that they receive. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Susan Chamberlain. Susan is one of the founding members of the Palo Alto chapter of 350.org.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Did you hear what I just said?
No, we did not.
Okay. Well, I'll start again. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to join our Palo Alto City Council Candidates Climate Forum, hosted by the 350 Silicon Valley Palo Alto Climate Team. Tonight, we have a wonderful opportunity to hear our City Council candidates' views on the climate crisis. Environmental sustainability has been a priority of our council for the last several years, and they made a commitment in 2016 to reduce our carbon footprint 80% by 2030. Yet we've made woefully little progress in the last 4 years. And now wildfires, drought, and smoke are giving us yet another wake-up call that the earth needs our attention now. We know that the next council will have to deal with many urgent issues: COVID, budget deficits, retail failures, but looming over all these issues is the existential threat posed by the climate emergency. We don't have any time to lose, moving forward aggressively toward a carbon neutral future. So it is imperative that we elect a city council eager to take on this crisis, keep their eye on the climate ball, and pass policies which will get us to 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. Before we start, I'd like to introduce our 18 co-sponsoring faith and climate organizations. We have an outstanding group of local climate nonprofit organizations and faith communities which are engaged in climate action. They represent just about every focus area of climate action, from electrification to land use, from transportation to saving and planting trees, from youth-led to mothers-led and faith-based. If any of you here tonight are interested in joining others to take climate action in an area of your particular interest, please go to the chat room for a list of these organizations and how to contact them. Or send an email to us at our email listed in the chat, and we'll get back to you with the information you need. Our co-sponsoring organizations are on the slide. They are Acterra, Canopy, California Interfaith Power and Light, Carbon Free Palo Alto, Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'd like to give CCL a special shout out for providing the Zoom webinar account and the tech staffing that made this forum possible. Cool Block Palo Alto, First Congregational Church, Palo Alto, First Presbyterian, Palo Alto Cool Planet Working Group, Friends of Caltrain, League of Conservation Voters, Mothers Out Front, Palo Alto Forward, Peninsula for Everyone, and Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, Sunrise Movement, Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto Green Sanctuary Committee, and the University AME Zion Church. As you can see, this is an impressive list of organizations that are doing really good work. We're so grateful for all you do. And hopefully you in the audience will find a way to get involved. The order for the evening is as follows. First, we have an opening question of the candidates for which they have prepared. Then we'll ask 3 questions answered in up to 90 seconds of each of the candidates. This is followed by a lightning round of questions with yes/no answers. And finally, we will leave some time for audience questions. As John noted up front, please post your questions throughout the forum in the Q&A box. Our time tonight is pretty tight, so we respectfully ask the candidates to stay within the times allotted. You will see the timer on your screen, and please finish your answer within that time to ensure that we can cover as many questions as possible. We'll rotate the order in which the candidates answer the questions. The order will be alphabetical, with the first person going.
I think we just lost Susan. So basically, the order of rotation will be that the person who answers first goes to the back of the line. And then we'll just rotate through that way, something I'm sure you're all familiar with. So I guess I'll take the cue here from Susan. To get us started, I want to welcome the Reverend Coloma Smith as the moderator of our forum. He's the pastor of the nearly 100-year-old University African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Palo Alto. Pastor Smith's welcoming, non-traditional approach is connecting people of all backgrounds to authentically experience the rich and sophisticated message of God. He is presently serving as chair of the Palo Alto Human Resources Commission, where he is a community leader with a prophetic moral voice in our city. Please welcome Pastor Coloma Smith.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing welcome. Tonight, I just want to open us up with a few quick remarks. I want to give the candidates as much time as possible, but I believe that the environment and the climate crisis present significant existential danger to future generations. We have a lot of problems that we have to deal with today, but we can't ignore the future. And that's why when I received this call and did some research and sat with these folks, I felt this was so important. So tonight we have a distinguished group of candidates for our city council. We are really fortunate in the city of Palo Alto to have such a great group. We have Burt, Rebecca Eisenberg, Egg Leon, Stephen Lee, Raven Malone, Greer Stone, Greg Tanaka, Carrie Templeton, Ajit Pharma, and Lydia Koo was invited, but she declined to be with us. Right now, I want to give the candidates each 2 minutes. Please stick with the 2 minutes. The timer is on the screen. If we run a little over, I'll interject gently to begin with, but we have 2 minutes. So here goes the question. Do you support the city's 80% carbon reduction by 2030, also known as the by 80 by 30 goal? Yes or no? If yes, given our budget shortfalls as a council member, what would be your top 2 to 3 programs, specifically in electrification and transportation, to meet our goal? Right now, we'll have the questions answered in this order. First, we'll have Pat Burt, then Rebecca Eisenberg, Ed Leon, Stephen Lee, Raven Malone, Greer Stone, Greg Tanaka, Carrie Templeton, and then Ajit Varma. Thank you. So, Pat?
Thank you, and thanks for the forum. Yes, I strongly support the 80-30 goal, which is 80% reduction off of our 1990 baseline by 2030. I actually, during my second term as mayor in 2016, led the adoption of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan with the 80-30 goal. Prior to that, I had a long involvement in environmental policy, including as vice chair of Sustainable San Mateo County. And when I came on the council in 2008, I became one of several council members who really took on climate change initiatives as one of our principal focuses. And in doing so, what we did was we upped our renewable electricity portfolio from 20% to 33%, and then we took it all the way so that it balanced with our hydropower to 100% carbon-free electricity, which we achieved essentially in 2014, 2015. And in doing so, we got to a 36% reduction off of the baseline. That, in a way, was global leading and a model for many other cities, but it was the easier things to do. Remaining are electrification of buildings and vehicles. And on the buildings, it's really going to boil down to a pretty aggressive retrofit program. I think the first thing that we can do, and it doesn't really affect our budget, is mandating retrofitting of commercial buildings over the next several years with a very strong incentive program, an education program on residential buildings, and a streamlining and reduction in the permitting process and the cost of permitting. And then the big thing is vehicles. The bulk of what we have to accomplish is through electrification of vehicles, and secondarily through vehicle miles travel. The vehicle miles travel is through transit and commute reductions and otherwise.
Thank you so much. Rebecca Eisenberg is next.
Thank you so much. I absolutely support this goal. And in fact, I think it's that we can beat that goal. I think we can far greater reduce our carbon footprint. And in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, Palo Alto, we can afford to do so. First, I want to talk about why this is such an important goal. Climate action is not just about saving the earth, which is an extraordinarily important goal and a very urgent goal. Climate action is also a social justice measure. We know that communities of color and other vulnerable communities are hurt the most by climate change. We will never achieve a fair and just society if we don't tackle the climate change problem immediately. First, as to funding sources, I believe we don't have any need for budget cuts. If we actually diversified our budget beyond the regressive sales tax, which harms consumers, and the hotel tax, which hasn't worked, especially to have a business tax on large businesses, we could afford to get there in a couple of years. That said, we have to work with what we have now, and what I propose is actually increasing fees for utilities for businesses, since we know that 70% of all energy use is created by our commercial sector. We need to work on that. We need to charge them for what they're costing us. And with that, we need to really prioritize electrification. We need to work with our regional authorities, not just locally, to make sure that we have tread the path for electrification. And as to transportation, we need to provide useful options to single-use vehicles, which are the biggest creators of carbon. We need to have shuttles and regional transit and bike lanes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Next we'll have Ed.
Yep, Ed Lowing. I love the ecumenical sponsorship from so many groups. Worked with Acterra for many years on the Parks Commission and worked on Cool Block in my own block. That was just amazing. So yes, I do support this. I understand that it's aggressive, and I understand that it's aggressive because it has to be. for us to be making progress on this in a reasonable time frame. So with respect to the two, relative to the question, the two items that you wanted in terms of programs, I'd like to address the reducing vehicle miles traveled and then electrifying some of the remaining miles. And the first one, obviously, we've caught a little bit of a short-term break here with work at home. I think it'll be, lasting a while, maybe forever, but we can't stop there. We do need to continue to enforce that with offices that they should be working at home. But more importantly, we should be emphasizing it in our own city and allow the workers to continue to work at home. And the other thing we have to do is get people out of cars. So we talked about this in a couple of other forums recently, but the way you need to do that is to, as I've said before, be safe and be safe. Meaning we have to be safe in terms of having infrastructure that makes people feel comfortable on the road in any kind of non-SOV. And then they have to have a safe place to store their bike at the end, so it's there when they come out of their appointment or whatever. But I also think we should try to make bikes fun and healthy and make people do it, incent them to do it in their leisure life, and it'll carry over to commuting. The second one is definitely has to do with the electric vehicles. Palo Alto's already has a positive bias towards electric vehicles and kind of led the country in that. So there's a proclivity there that I think we can work with. The problem that we have to address is the infrastructure. So we really have to get the infrastructure in place in both residences and companies. And then I'd like to see a small stipend at least to.
Thank you so much, Ed. The next one will be done by Stephen.
Good evening. I'm Stephen Lee. I'm a progressive Democrat running for City Council, and I'm proud to be one of only 3 candidates endorsed by the County Democratic Party. I'm also endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters and Carbon Free Palo Alto. Climate change is an existential threat. As a millennial, I absolutely support the goal of reducing our emissions by 80% by 2030. I just turned 32 2 weeks ago, so that will make me at 42 in 2030. The decisions we make in this next decade will determine what sort of world I and many of your kids and grandkids will be left with over the next 40 to 50 years. We simply cannot afford to wait any longer or to be satisfied with half measures or delayed action. I'm quite disappointed with the city staff's suggestion that we focus in the next 2 years only on low-cost strategies which don't have the largest GHG reduction impacts. Now is precisely the time to double down on our commitment to climate change, not slow down. We need to speed up plans, take even bolder action to address climate change. And I'm going to warn folks, some of the changes we need to make will be uncomfortable ones, but the cost of inaction or delayed action are even higher. We saw how bad things got a couple weeks ago, and they certainly can get worse. For me, I'm going to reject the premise of the question just a little bit. While we do face major budget shortfalls, we cannot afford to fall behind. It's simply not an option. More so than many other areas in our budget, this is an absolute must-have. So we must look at preserving and expanding on existing programs and funding, identify additional revenue sources to support larger and more aggressive action, including a business tax on larger and profitable businesses, and look at how we can tax the very type of carbon-emitting behavior we want to discourage, not only to reduce those emissions, but to fund the changes we need to make as a society, while of course providing exceptions and subsidies for low-income communities who may not be able to afford it. We need to require and mandate the very changes that we need. We need to look at building dense housing near transit corridors.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Next, we will have Raven Malone.
Yes. So I do agree with Stephen. The decisions that we make today will determine the quality of life of the future generations. So I actually think that's where we should start. So, oh, and also, yes, I do agree that I support this city goal. So I would like to start with a program through the school system where the city can partner with the school system, set up annual contests for students, primarily middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, and allow them to show their knowledge when it comes to conserving energy and water conservation. And the winners of this contest can receive various gifts, gift cards, be pretend mayor for a day, I don't know, but something to keep them engaged and get them interested in conservation while they're young. Also, DMV discounts for registration of electric vehicles that will encourage people to buy electric vehicles instead of gas, and and utility rebates. Since we own our own utilities company, that makes it a little easier. And we can offer rebates to owners and managers of properties when you upgrade to qualifying energy efficient products, like switching from gas to electric, adding solar panels, etc. And the qualifying products can be installed using with the tenants units or in common areas of apartment buildings, mobile homes, and condos, as well as getting a rebate with qualifying smart thermostats. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much. Our next candidate is Greer Stone.
Good evening. I want to start by thanking the climate team, Reverend Smith, and all the climate organizations and faith-based communities who are sponsoring tonight's forum, and of course to all of you at home who are spending your Tuesday night with us. And my father is a former Yosemite Park ranger, and growing up, I spent countless summers at Yosemite developing a deep love for nature and understanding the importance of conservation and sustainability. The existential threat that is climate change is no longer hypothetical. It's here in our backyard, threatening our homes, our loved ones, our quality of life, and the future for our children. We have all been impacted by climate change in some form or the other. My parents were evacuated from their home in Boulder Creek back in August due to the fires there, and still have been unable to return home. Unless we act now, with bold policies and conviction for our desire to save this planet, we will be too late. Because of this, I emphatically support our city's 80 by 30 goal, and I would go one step further and advocate for Palo Alto to have zero net energy consumption by 2040. In order to help us meet that goal, I would first indefinitely extend telecommuting when this pandemic ends in order to continue the benefits we have seen with reduced traffic and the correlating impact on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Second, I would ensure our city has an aggressive transportation demand management program with enforcement mechanisms to require new development to reduce single occupancy vehicle use. And third, I would embrace REACH codes and require new buildings be fully electric and offer incentives for existing homes and commercial buildings to be retrofitted for electrification. I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club, Senator Jerry Hill, the Palo Alto Weekly, the Mercury News, and several environmentalists, including Karen Holman, Yoriko Kishimoto, Enid Pearson, Emily Renzel, and many more. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I look forward to our discussion tonight.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Greg Tanaka.
Thank you, Reverend Smith, and all the organization attendees for participating. So I'm currently on the City Council. I fully support 80 by 30. Climate change is probably the biggest problem facing humanity. You have to think about spaceship Earth. We've had one of the hottest summers ever. And if you look at what is one of the biggest components of our greenhouse gas, it's actually transportation. So one of the best ways to actually decrease this is to actually get more people biking. So we already have really high bike usage in our city where we have great weather, we have really flat terrain, but there's a tier of bikers who aren't currently biking today that don't do it because of safety reasons. And so we need to make the next tier of bikers feel safer with protected bike lanes, also give them places to lock their bikes, to charge their bikes. I've also on council advocated for scooter and bike share. I think that could also be a really great way to make this affordable, make it really ubiquitous. I also push for subsidies, not just for electric cars, but also for electric bikes. Right now, we're benefiting from a lot of workers working from home, and we have some of the bluest skies ever. So we should kind of ride that coattail and promote more work from home. I'm the only council member who currently, rain or shine, will bike to council meetings. I basically never drive there. So I practice what I preach. And the other part of this is also coupling it with transit VTA. There's a lot more representation we need on VTA to make it serve our city. The other part is natural gas use. So natural gas, I voted for the ban of natural gas in new homes, and but a lot of our current usage is with existing housing. So we need to create incentive programs to actually allow the conversion of the natural gas to electric in these single-family homes, as well on the commercial side. The other part is streamlining these programs. It can be very difficult and very expensive. So we want to have not just programs, but streamlining so that a lot of the red tape's cut. I'm proud of being
Thank you so
endorsed
much,
by,
council member. Our next candidate is Carrie Templeton.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie Templeton, and I'm running to make the promise of Palo Alto available to everyone in the community. And what I'd like to share with you tonight is definitely support our sustainability and climate action plan, including our 80 by 30 goal. Many of the ideas I've heard tonight, especially from Raven Malone and Greg Tanaka, are ones that I share. I'm interested especially in things we can do during COVID time. So I love the program about the shared streets, where we have some streets that are closed off to car traffic so that we have more space for walking and biking. I'd like to do that in more neighborhoods. We've only got a few streets that are participating in that program, but our neighborhood, we have a few areas where we could benefit from that. That's very short term. So for the longer term, I think during this downtime, we're seeing a lot of people upgrading their home and making upgrades in their homes. So this would be a great time for us to incentivize people to upgrade to electric appliances in their homes. And we could do things like rebates, which Raven mentioned, and also installing solar panels, battery walls. One other thing is we have fees associated with installing electric vehicle chargers. Maybe during COVID time, we could eliminate those fees or reduce those fees significantly so that it's a bump for people to take action sooner rather than later. Without our local shuttle, we can look for alternatives to experiment with, like e-bikes and e-scooters. I think Mr. Tanaka mentioned that. And finally, we need housing, and we should build those near transportation corridors. And even if we as a city aren't flush with money, there are people who are ready to share their designs with us, and we can give feedback during this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And our next candidate is Ajit Varma.
Thank you, Reverend Smith. Thanks for the opportunity. So when we look at the greenhouse gas production in Palo Alto, a lot of times we talk about the transportation and the natural gas. And so transportation is about 2/3 of the production and natural gas is about 1/3. So there are a lot of things that we can do to address those two issues. So one is on the transportation side is incentives, as a lot of people mentioned, getting people to move to electric vehicles, but also it is important that people live close to where they work. And I am a big supporter of density and mixed use development so that people don't have a long ways to go. Also that there are other things that we can do, like encourage bike riding, encourage walking, encouraging taking things like Caltrain, and building in those transportation corridors, which I think will be really valuable. For natural gas, I think that there are a lot of things that we could do for new developments in terms of building codes and restrictions on requiring things like electrical water heaters and electrical grills. But for old houses, I do think it will take a while. And the thing that was great about 80/30 is it was ahead of its time in Palo Alto. The citizens came together and really pushed this great initiative, and we became sort of at the forefront of recognizing the climate change is a real problem and we have to address it. But the unfortunate reality is that we haven't made a lot of progress on this. So I think that we can be a lot more aggressive. This isn't a choice, in my view. It's a necessity in order for us to make these reductions. And I think that we should have like a ratcheted system to say that if certain limits aren't hit, like what are the more aggressive things that we can do, from days without cars or reduced car ownership. And also beyond just transportation and utilities, I do think that there's other things that we overlook that cause greenhouse gas, like the production of meat and like eating meat, or also a better use of land and production and planting of trees can help reduce and absorb greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for really observing the time. It was really good. All right, we're now going to ask you 3 questions about policies you would support or propose to fight climate change. This time you have 90 seconds to answer each question. Okay, the first question. First, we're interested in how you view the issue of social equity in regard to the city's sustainability and carbon action plan, also known as the SCAP. How will you ensure that Palo Alto's SCAP will result in an equitable transition to clean energy economy? For example, credit score limits, which are tied to systematic racism, are often barriers to loans for efficiency and electrification. Will you commit to looking for anti-racist financing mechanisms, and what would that investigation look like? We will start with Rebecca Eisenberg, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Reverend, for asking this question. I think about this a lot. As you heard in my opening, I truly, genuinely, profoundly view climate action as an issue of racial justice. Climate change harms communities of color and other vulnerable communities exponentially more than it harms white and otherwise privileged communities. We need to address climate change in every way we can. I agree with you that credit scores and financial methods, like you mentioned, tend to have, well, they definitely have a history of racial bias, and they have a present that has evolved from that and hasn't gotten to where we need it to be. Therefore, I believe strongly that we in the city of Palo Alto need to invest heavily in our communities of color, in our vulnerable populations. We need to provide solar panels to as many people as we can. We can finance these with the old-fashioned finance ways. We can take the surplus back for the city. We need to tax our largest businesses that have profited from the pandemic. With that money, we need to invest in our communities. We need to share our advantages with our nearby neighbors of East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, because these communities have been excluded from us through racism. I believe investing in our people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next is Ed Leon.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I would be very aggressive about investigating anything that would be racial bias with respect to getting this sustainability across our town. And that would be certainly credit scores and, income screening, that type of thing. And in general, anyone at a lower income level is going to need some help, and we need to provide it. We can't be excluding that. One of our big goals is to get more people into true affordable housing in this town, and that has to be part of the package, is that we're going to address that. One suggestion for reducing vehicles that has been suggested by the city to be investigated is to ban internal combustion engines. Well, that doesn't work for folks that can't buy a new Tesla. It doesn't work at all. So we have to still allow certain segments of the population to drive what they can drive, because they might have to get to work or take the kids to soccer practice. So it absolutely should be a full umbrella for everybody in this city, and that's going to cost the city some money, and that's a good thing.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Stephen Lee.
Short answer to the question, absolutely. I will look into and investigate and end racist financing policies. I think we also need to get serious about housing. You've heard me say it time after time that housing is so intricately linked to many of the issues we care about as a community, and they include climate change and addressing racial and economic inequality. We need to be honest and confront our history head on and realize that exclusionary zoning is a successor to redlining and to other forms of overt discrimination, and that the effect of exclusionary zoning today is to continue to exclude racial and economic minorities from our community. So we need to look to end exclusionary zoning, enable the building of duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes that blend in very well into our neighborhood. And we need to enable and reduce barriers to building dense housing along transit corridors, including re-examining our height limits and our parking requirements. So if we are serious about making sure that climate change works for all of us, we really need to take a look at housing. We also need to make sure that as we mandate new requirements, that we set aside subsidies and exceptions for low-income and minority communities who may not necessarily have the economic resources to comply with these new requirements. So there's a lot we can do, but we first need to start with evaluating our own housing policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next candidate will be Raven Malone.
Yes, I do support this. We have to allow multifamily homes. Cities that are primarily R1 have been proven to disproportionately push out people of color. Allowing more multifamily homes will not only bring down the affordability for our essential workers, but also our families of color. I would also push to remove race from loan applications. I don't see how that's relevant. And allow rebates for electric cars and sustainable home modifications for marginalized communities. Like Stephen said, we also have to focus on more density, infill, and this allows for more affordable units when looking at apartment complexes and condos, as well as preventing urban sprawl, which has been also known to hurt the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Greer Stone.
Yes, and great question, Reverend Smith. Thank you for leading off this this conversation about the issues of equity and inclusion. I 100% support that this investigation and this work, and it's the type of work that I've been doing for the last 8 years. I'm the former chair of the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission. I currently serve as the vice chair of the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission, and I've been working with Silicon Valley Climate Alliance to actually make climate change a human rights issue, because it really is one. We do know that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color. And for example, sea level rise. Sea level rise is expected to rise by 36 inches by 2100. That is going to disproportionately impact East Palo Alto, especially the Garden District, because they're just 7 feet over sea level. So we need to work on these issues collaboratively with the local jurisdictions to be able to get these under control. And additionally, things like electrification is going to be able to help us have cheaper buildings, to be able to create additional affordable housing. Because the real key here is not talking about building market rate, like a lot of candidates are talking about ending single family zoning and allowing market rate to be able to create that type of housing. That's going to create more housing for millionaires in this community. We really need to be actually targeting our housing policy so that we are creating housing for those who need it most in our community. I'd also be interested in looking at displacement impact studies as well to make sure that new development is not
Thank you so much.
impacting communities of color.
Thank you. The next candidate will be Greg Tanaka.
Great question. Thank you. So racial or socioeconomic bias has no place. We're all in the same spaceship, Earth. And no matter what your ethnicity is, global warming is going to impact you. You can't say your side of the ship is sinking just because you're poor. That doesn't make sense. We're all in the same place. So last night on council, we talked about ADUs, and there's an example of a conflict. There are some people who want to build ADUs, but because of the really expensive green building rules, it makes it cost prohibitive for some people. So those are some of the things that we have to contend with. Another thing is, we give incentives for electric cars, but electric cars, frankly, are really for people who are fairly wealthy, right? Like I don't have an electric car. I drive a regular car, or actually I really don't drive much, by bike mainly. And so I've been pushing very hard for subsidies for electric bikes because they're much more affordable. It allows a much wider range of socioeconomic diversity for people to participate in improving the environment. So I think that's really important. Affordable housing is also really important. So last time we also talked about, housing near transit. So smaller, denser units near transit really greatly reduces the carbon footprint. And so that's another piece of the puzzle that we need to do. The last part is offsetting our carbon output. So on council, I've been pushing for buying offset credits and also more inexpensive offset credits, especially here in our local state where we've had a lot of wildfires. So I think that's another part of the solution.
Thank you so much. Our next candidate is Carrie Templeton.
Thank you so much, Reverend Smith. This is an incredibly important question. I'm so glad that you posed it to us and we're having this discussion. I keep thinking about some of the older housing that our lower income residents are living in. It's often inefficient, and the residents are displaced when those properties are being upgraded or remodeled, and then they find themselves unable to afford it after it's been upgraded. So we need to find ways to make sure that any housing displacement for our green upgrades are fair to the residents so that they can come back and not have significant rate increases that would prohibit them from returning to their homes. We can also think about that's mainly for rental folks, for folks that are owning their homes, maybe a better time to make those upgrades, those energy efficiency upgrades, would be at the time of transfer. We find that homeowners often make upgrades at the time of purchase or at the time of sale. So those would be better times. The financing, we could find ways to have the financing kind of bake that in so it's not a separate financing issue. And as a program manager, one of the things I think about is how to unblock problems. If people are prohibited or prevented from making the upgrades they need, we need to listen to them and find out what exactly are the specific issues and tackle those.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We now have Ajit Varma.
Thank you. So there are a lot of things in our city that are for public. So we have roads, people are building roads and everybody can use roads. The environment also is something that affects all of us. So it's really important that we make sure that that everyone in our city, and not just in our city, has the resources they need in order to move to more sustainable energy sources and clean energy sources. So the first thing that I would look is, I think it's important to talk to the community. I think the 80-30 plan was a great community-led initiative to highlight the importance of this. So I think that it's important for us to talk to like the various segments of our city to see what barriers are there in order to adopt this. I think that there are things that we need to come together as a community to do. So things like solar panels, like subsidies, making sure that they're done in a way that is equitable, that everyone has access to them, making sure that other clean energy options are also equally accessible to everyone in our city. So these are just part of it. And I agree that electric cars, a lot of the things on the transportation side are only accessible by people who do have a lot of wealth and resources. So I think encouraging things like bicycling and making sure that there are bike lanes, that there are shared bikes, that there are public bikes, that there are public electric bikes. I think that a lot of these community resources that are equally accessible by the entire city are very important to make sure no one's left out.
Thank you so much. And our final candidate is Pat Burt.
Thank you. So we need to actually talk concretely about what programs can achieve these goals for the low-income members of our community. And as Ajit mentioned earlier, 2/3 of the remaining greenhouse gas production is from our transportation. 1/3 is approximately is from our buildings. We've had the highest adoption rate of electric vehicles in the country, or nearly so. But that's because we have high disposable income and a value structure for so many of our members of our community. But those who don't have that high disposable income are the target area that we need to do. And the solution that I think we need is a community-based nonprofit bank where the city can include some of its passive investments into that fund and other nonprofits to create a fund, a loan fund for electric vehicles and for conversion of rental properties to electrification. Within just 3 years on electric vehicles, we anticipate that the cost of ownership will be lower, including the payment on loans for an electric vehicle than internal combustion engine. So we can leverage that cost and extend that and provide loans where we can control who gets those loans and on what basis and drive that adoption.
Thank you so much. Okay, great answers from this round from our panel. I'm grateful to the 158 people that are watching this right now. Thank you so much for participating in this vital discussion. One way that you can participate and be more interactive is if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box, But on top of that, in the bottom left of each question, you will see a thumbs up. If you want to hear us ask the question at the end of this session for the open question round, please check those questions. You have by vote a way to ask the candidates exactly what you want to ask. So I want to encourage you right now Our top question only has 13 thumbs up. So we have 158 people and only, oh, there he goes. We got 14 people are starting to check in. So keep on picking those questions because we really want to ask the questions that you want. All right. Our second question is this. Vehicle emissions are our biggest source of carbon emissions in Palo Alto. Are you willing to change our local zoning laws to allow for higher density to reduce the vehicle emissions? Changes could include allowing for duplexes and triplexes in R1 single family zone, raising height limits and reducing parking requirements, for example. So we're going to start with Ed as the first person to answer.
Yeah, truly affordable housing for people that can't get into our town is the top priority. And we have to look at all of the ideas that you just suggested there. If it's going to work, they got a pencil in the sense that they have to make sense for both sides. But yeah, and the logical place to do it is in the transit corridors. No disagreement with that. But in that regard, we have to improve our transportation there. Obviously, we don't have a train right now. We think it's coming back. I think it's going to definitely come back. It's just too severely needed here to go away. So I think that'll be back. The shuttles are down. We got to get those back up. As we know, VTA has been cutting the bus routes, and we need to negotiate with them to get those to come back up to be able to have that regional transportation for someone who is close to the transportation area. Some of the people that are going to live in those houses aren't necessarily going to work there, but still, if they're in town and there's a bus and there's a shuttle, they'll be able to get around just fine. And if they have a car, it'll stay in the garage most of the week, and they'll, go somewhere else on the weekend. But I would strongly suggest looking at any of those kinds of measures if we can get true below market rate housing.
Thank you so much. Next candidate is Stephen Lee.
So currently in Palo Alto, we have a 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance. So if we are serious about addressing our carbon emissions, we need to enable folks to actually live near the jobs that they work at. And while some permanent form of work from home may help a little bit, we have to be realistic and realize that most employees are likely going to want to or have to return to their offices. So we need to look at how do we enable the types of housing we need to address our 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance. Certainly some of those people are folks who would live in affordable housing, and some of the, quite a few of those people are folks who would live in market rate housing too. So if we're serious about climate change and reducing our carbon emissions, we can't simply focus only on affordable housing. We need to address the larger jobs to housing imbalance. We need to get rid of exclusionary zoning, enable dense housing along transit corridors. While Palo Alto has quite a few folks who drive electric vehicles, most of these people are folks who own their own homes. So we need to install more EV chargers so that the 46% of us who are renters and who are unable to install our own chargers are actually able to choose greener vehicle options. But yeah, we need to build housing for all of the folks that that work in our community if we're serious about addressing carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Raven Malone.
So yes, we do need to be more flexible with our zoning. We need to allow more duplexes, triplexes, the cute little cottage clusters that are adorable. We need to allow denser housing near transit. We need to raise the height maximum. We also need to lower parking minimums. We can't really do this without improving our infrastructure, improving public transit, bringing back more shuttles, looking into light rails, and improving our bike infrastructure to make it easier to get around Palo Alto, especially if we're bringing housing closer to jobs, and that allows for people to get around without a car. I think it's really unfortunate that the shuttle is stopped right now. I understand now it's a safety concern, but we do need to look back to bring that back with more shuttles, more routes, more stops, so that it lets people move around more efficiently throughout the city. And we do need market rate housing in order to create affordable housing. That's actually the way the city does things. You can't just create affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Greer Stone.
Yes, I think we can and we should be negotiating with developers, especially for housing production near transit corridors, to increase density. I mean, to negotiate with them on density, height limits, parking. But in return, we need to be making sure that we are getting a good return on that negotiation. I mean, that's key to negotiation. So we need to make sure that we are having increased inclusionary zoning, so we're getting more below market rates in these units. And we need to make sure that we're having a transportation demand management program that actually has teeth. So if a developer says, okay, we're going to underpark this development, if they don't, if parking for that development ends up overflowing into residential streets, they need to be able to be heavily penalized for that. Then we can also use those funds for additional affordable housing, because we can create affordable housing. It's through government subsidies. We got to look at additional ways to be able to raise that that income. I do think definitely we need more housing, and that will be able to help us with reducing the need of commuters coming into town. But we can't kid ourselves. Only 25% of employed residents actually work in Palo Alto, and those numbers are not likely to change. So we need to look at other things as well. I'm really interested in definitely extending telecommuting when this pandemic ends. At a 7-week span of shelter in place in April, greenhouse gas emissions were reduced by 32% in the Bay Area. This is a strong tool that we can be able to use to target greenhouse gas emissions and improve our climate.
Thank you so much. We have Councilmember Greg Tanaka.
Thanks, Reverend Smith. So last night on council, we talked about EDUs and increasing the flexibility of EDU rules, which I voted for and passed on council. This is really important. One of the things I pushed for was to allow more living space underground, like we do for the main residents, as well as underground parking. And this would also allow us to solve some of the housing problem without much impact on our neighbors. EDUs actually have a really big benefit as well in terms of social benefit. It allows multi-generational living. Several of my neighbors here have built EDUs so their parents can help take care of the kids. Some of them have, I know one lady, she's building EDU so she can live in there and then rent out to her main house for income. So there's lots of benefits with that. It also allows people to work from home. Some people with little kids, and I know that Jeet could probably attest to this, people with little kids think working from home is very challenging, right? But if you have this EDU, that's another possibility. So there's a lot of benefits to EDUs. I think really the solution to affordable housing is smaller units near transit, because when you're near transit, the need for a car really goes down. So for example, I live in College Terrace. It's only about a mile from the Caltrain station, and 99% of the time, I'm either biking, skateboarding, or walking. They're naturally more green. They're smaller, more energy efficient. It doesn't take as much carbon footprint to produce them or to live in them.
Thank you so much. The next candidate will be Carrie Templeton.
Thank you very much. We have evolved this question into two parts, one more about affordable housing and one more about emissions. So let me start with what kind of changes would be appropriate for us to have so that we can have denser housing near transit that would allow us to address the emissions. And I do think that we have to have some amount of flexibility on height limits. For example, if something were going to be 51 feet but have 20 more units, we should probably talk about being flexible there. Parking restrictions are also another issue, especially because underground parking requires excavation and is often very expensive and sometimes not feasible due to our high water table. So we have to think about how all those things play together. The net benefit really is the housing. So if we can have housing, and especially affordable housing, that's important. It does seem unlikely that we're going to have 100% affordable housing on every project that comes to Palo Alto. So I think we need to better understand where we have that dial right now. Is it 15%? Is it 20%? How much affordable housing can we get our developers to create? So we really want to maximize that number. So my hope is we can have some flexibility on height limits and parking, and we can encourage our developers to build as much of their developments as as affordable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next is Ajit Varma.
I am a big fan of more density. I actually live just a few blocks away from University Avenue. And at the beginning of the stay-at-home orders, I sold my car. And now I'm able to walk and bike everywhere. But this is only possible because I live near commercial, I live near Whole Foods, I live near grocery stores, I live near drugstores. So it's very easy for me to get around everywhere. And I enjoy it a lot. Like, it's more inconvenient for me to actually get into a car and go somewhere than just walk or bike there. So for me, like, I think that density is also not just about like just housing density, because then wherever your job is, you still probably, for many people, have to drive there. And so I think that when I think of density, it's building mixed use. And when I look at University Avenue, I think that that's a great opportunity. We can shut down University Avenue to cars. We can build housing there. We can build office space there. We can build everything that you need in a very close proximity to each other. And you can have this great place where you can walk down, you can meet your neighbors, you can go everywhere you need, and you have very easy walkability to Caltrain as well, if you ever need to go to further areas. So to me, it's all about like density. And I think that mixed use, and so it's not just neighbors close together, but all your resources and everything you need in a city close to you is really important to me. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Pat Burt.
Thanks. So yes, this needs a multi-pronged approach, and we've actually adopted a whole series of elements already that are starting to take a significant impact. In 2016, I helped lead the council support for initiating the ADU reforms well ahead of the state actually doing it. Since then, we not only have expanded ADUs to all residential lots, all single family lots in the city, but we now are adopting one that allows a junior ADU within the house. So essentially 2 ADUs. In doing so, we more than doubled the number of housing units that we're zoned for in the city, just in the single family neighborhoods. But on top of that, we need the density in the key core areas if we're going to build dense housing. And we adopted those zones as our downtown areas, the El Camino corridor, and the Cal Ave and University downtown. It really needs to be expanded into the Stanford Research Park, which is a low density development area that has far more acreage than we can ever allow to have additional offices, and the offices just compound the housing shortage. And what we need to do is eliminate the underlying office zoning in many of those areas to make the housing affordable to go forward, and I support that strongly. But we also need to recognize that 75% of our residents do not work in Palo Alto when they live here, and that will be the case for new residents, although they do generate local trips.
Thank you so much. And finally, for this question, we have Rebecca Eisenberg.
So yes, we must urgently change our local zoning laws. Right now, they aren't serving our community. Our jobs to housing ratio is actually 7-to-1 when it comes to our lowest income workers. These workers include most of our service sector, including essential workers who keep us healthy and who save lives. We must ensure that these workers have housing near their jobs. Many of them commute several hours each way to save our lives. To do that, we need to eliminate undue limits for housing, not commercial development. It harms the environment, actually, when we require developers to build out, not up. We need to rethink overly large lot sizes in neighborhoods with the largest lot sizes. We need to address the ghost house situation, where as much as half of the homes in some neighborhoods, like mine, Old Palo Alto, are actually vacant. If we had a vacancy tax or code enforcement, we could help solve that problem. We need to enable the fast track of conversion of commercial buildings to housing and rezone the city for residential unless proven otherwise. We have to loosen parking requirements, starting with housing near transit, and all housing eventually needs to be near transit. Most of all, we need to fix our broken permitting project. Statewide, there's been a lot of action on that. We need to make sure that housing developments aren't stopped due to an overly burdensome system. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our audience. They are really engaging right now. We've doubled the amount of questions and the amount of votes in the Q&A box. I want to encourage you to go back and check the Q&A box because there's a lot of good questions that are at the bottom of the box that might need your vote, because we want to make sure we get the right questions to the candidates. So right now in our audience, I'll ask you to hit the Q&A box. It's right at the bottom. Scroll down, look at the questions. People are asking some really intelligent and great questions. So I want to make sure that people are participating and voting on these questions. Our final question in this round is, what ideas do you have to get people out of their cars to support more carbon-free mobility and reduce traffic congestion in Palo Alto? And we'll start with Stephen.
So I hate to go back to this, but in order to get more people out of their cars, we need to actually enable them to live near where they work. Yeah, only 25% of current Palo Altans actually work in Palo Alto, but that number should go up if we actually enable and build the housing near the jobs. We have a 3-to-1 jobs to housing imbalance, so we need to address that. But we also need to make sure that we double down on our bike and pedestrian infrastructure. You know, I had a town hall with about 40 high school students, and they love biking in Palo Alto, but they simply do not feel safe biking. So we need to make sure that we have protected bike lanes, look at doing road diets to separate bikes from vehicles, and just make it safer and more enjoyable for people of all ages to make better choices. Many of the car miles that we have around this town are less than 3 miles. So if we invest in the infrastructure, the bike and pedestrian infrastructure, it will make it easier and safer and more enjoyable for residents to choose greener options. And I agree with Councilmember Tanaka. We need to look at how do we help people make better choices by looking at bike and e-bike share or rental programs to really bring down the cost of doing that. We need to make sure that we are building bike storage facilities at different locations so that folks, when they get there, they have some place to actually store their bikes. So there's a lot we can do, but we need to get serious about housing and building housing where the jobs are.
Sorry, the next candidate is Raven Malone.
Is my audio okay? No?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So building and implementing safer bike infrastructure will encourage more Palo Altans to commute by bike. I know I'm from the South. We didn't really bike with cars in the street, so it's a little nerve-wracking to me personally. And I'm sure, well, I've spoken to a lot of people who feel the same way, either by having had run-ins with cars, with drivers while trying to bicycle, or having a friend or a loved one. So safer biker infrastructure would be particularly helpful. Additionally, we need to make it more affordable for people who work in Palo Alto to live here. That would make it much more convenient for many of our workers, and that would also encourage them to use greener sources of transportation in order to get to work. If you only work around the block, then maybe you would walk or ride a bike. Also, bike share is a good thing that we should also look into. I know that there's an annual bike event, and I think that we should do that more often. I'm really upset that we weren't able to do it this year because I was looking forward to attending, but there's a lot that we can do, and I think community involvement plays a big part in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Greer Stone.
Every day, at least pre-COVID, thousands of workers pour into our city, and a majority of them are traveling in their private cars. According to a recent traffic survey in downtown, 55% of downtown employees commute via single occupancy vehicle trips. But of that number, 49% are interested in an alternative method of transportation. So we know the desire is there. People want to get out of their cars, but we need to be able to offer them different alternatives to encourage them to do so. So I would support working regionally with the VTA, Samtrans, Caltrain to increase service in Palo Alto. Locally, we need to provide various alternatives to single occupancy vehicle, including a more bike-friendly city requiring developers to have TDM policies that encourage go passes for employers around downtown and California Avenue, incentives for ride sharing, and for those who carpool into the city. We must also expand our own shuttle service and incentivize city employees to find alternative routes to work through the use of like a city-sponsored go pass and preferred parking for those who carpool. I would also work to phase out the distribution of non-residential RPPs. I mean, we have that 80 by 30 goal that we already talked about, but the city continues to allow variances to developers to make it easier for people to be able to travel here through single occupancy vehicle. We need to really be able to change that and align our policies to ensure that we are actively pursuing that 80 by 30 goal to reduce the amount of parking for commercial workers. In addition, having more workforce housing, so we're actually providing housing for those who serve our community.
Thank you so much.
Et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Greg Tanaka.
Thank you for the question. So there are really two parts to the solution. The first part is transit, and the second part is the last mile. How do you get the last mile taken care of? For transit, we really need better representation. San Jose dominates VTA. They take the lion's share of the funding, the lion's share of the routes. We get very little in here in North County. So we need better representation. So one thing you notice if you go to my endorsement, I have over 300 endorsements, almost twice to the next candidate, is a large number of endorsements from regional elected officials. And I think a regional solution is really what's needed to really solve this kind of transit problem. We can't do it alone here in our city. The second part is to partner with our local companies. So like Lyft and Uber. So like downtown Las Vegas has a program where you could take a free Uber ride into the downtown. And then of course you have to pay for your way back. But that's kind of part of the solution. In terms of solving the last mile solutions, kind of as Stephen mentioned, scooter share, bike shares is really important. I've talked about this before, but safer bike, making people feel safe when they bike, because if they don't feel safe, they're not going to bike. There's hardcore bikers like myself who will bike rain or shine, but we need to get a next tier of bikers to willing to get on the bikes and use it regularly. So that's the other really important piece. The last piece is around incentives. So if you look at the Stanford Research Park, they have a program as part of their team aid to encourage workers to get paid if they bike to work. And so you could look at these economic incentives to make things happen.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Carrie Templeton.
Thank you very much. I like a lot of what I've heard tonight. Definitely need more regional transit because they can't get off the train here in Palo Alto if they don't have anywhere to get on near where they live. So thank you for bringing up the last mile, Greg. I would like to add something that I haven't yet heard, and it's a large portion of the time I spent in my car before the pandemic hit. And this is for people that can't drive themselves and contributing to traffic by ferrying them hither and thither. I'm speaking specifically of my children, but I know that we also have the same situation with seniors or people that may not be permitted to drive, people with different abilities. So I think we can find ways to incentivize them to use transit if the transit exists. And many other people have brought up the challenges with VTA not servicing the north part of the county. I think we can partner with other bus services to address that. And I like the idea of the e-bike and e-scooters as well. But specifically, students I've spoken to have said they would love to bike more, but they don't know if they can bike home at night when it's dark and things like that. If we combine the bus service, maybe make it free for students and seniors, and then making it where they can bring their bikes home, that would be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The next is Ajit Varma.
Thank you. So I want to tie this into my own experience of getting out of a car. So a decade ago, I had sold my car, didn't have a car for 2 years. And I was biking and I got sideswiped by a car, fell, broke my wrist. And then I was honestly too scared to bike anymore. And so that meant I went back, got a car again. So that's the first thing that I would do is we just have to make it super safe for people to bike anywhere that they need to get to in Palo Alto. That's the first thing I do. The second thing is at the start of the pandemic, when I didn't have to go to work anymore, I sold my car and got basically just totally on a bike again. But what made this possible was a few things. One is I didn't want to pay for the cost of a car. I was like, why am I having this car sitting around? Why am I paying for car insurance? Why do I have this cost? So I think that things like also like, you know, RPP and like having to pay for these permits over a certain level. So I think that we can make it cost more for people for cars. And so it's a disincentive to own cars. And then finally, the other thing that made this possible for me to get out of a car and go with biking is that I live close to all the resources that I need. I live close to grocery stores. I live close to pharmacies. And so this just goes back to where I think that density and mixed use is another important aspect so that people no longer have a need to get into the car to go to work. I think as Pat mentioned, a lot of people in Palo Alto leave the city to go to their jobs. If we have commercial and mixed use, then people can live where they work. Even things like service workers and people who work in restaurants can afford to live near their office.
Thank you. And the next person is Pat Burt, next candidate.
Thanks. So my wife and I ride virtually everywhere in Palo Alto for all of our uses. I like to joke, people would ask me, oh, gee, that's great, you ride. And I said, well, I might have driven, but I didn't have time. Door to door in Palo Alto, I can get almost anywhere as fast by bike as I can by car when we have our traffic. But we need to expand the infrastructure for all micromobility. There's an emerging field of electric bikes, electric three-wheel for older people, scooters, and a whole range of mobility structure. And that's going to be a big part of our transportation future. We have electrified Caltrain that's coming up to speed. It's on construction right now. We need to vote for Measure RR to expand the Caltrain system. And we, in 2016, I led the city's negotiation on Measure B, which brought $300 million toward grade separations, but equally as important, money for modernization of Caltrain and expansion of bike systems. And that's how we're paying for a lot of our bike improvements. But we also have the city's TMA program, Transportation Management Association, that was piloted downtown. It's really great. It works. It subsidizes for low-income workers transit passes and rideshare apps. The problem is the business community was supposed to fund that. They haven't. We need a business tax to expand it citywide, and it can have a profound impact and social equity.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Rebecca Eisenberg.
So we need to recognize that although it's great that so many of us are able to ride their bikes from here to there, but there's a large number of people in our community who are not physically capable of riding bikes. In that regard, we need to give non-bike, non-walking options to our community. For example, we need to prioritize and revive what never truly happened, which is a robust system of electric shuttles. We need to coordinate better our local robust system with regional authorities. Palo Alto has a current and history of not getting along well with our regional neighbors. We need to change that. We will. We need to take advantage of our untaxed but very profitable local large companies like Tesla, who can afford to fund these efforts since we don't have a business tax. Santa Clara actually requires that Stanford provides the Marguerite for all of us. We could do the same with Tesla. The Marguerite not only carries Stanford community, it carries everyone. As to pedestrians, we need to prioritize investing in pedestrian bridges and make pedestrians safer by moving bikes to their own safe, by themselves bike lanes, like they do in Germany, like they do in other cities like San Francisco.
Thank you also. Thank you so much. And for this question, finally, we'll have Ed.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad I answered so many of these questions in my first question that we got in advance, because the basic there is safety.
Excuse me, Ed. I just want to be fair to you. Your audio is breaking up, so I want to make sure that everybody can hear you clearly. And can we reset his time, please?
Am I heard now or no? Is it any better?
So.
Yes? No?
Yes, a little better.
Okay. I'll speak up because I haven't done anything to the computer. I was saying that I mentioned the safety needed for bikes relative to the infrastructure. and the storage. So that's at the top of the list. But a lot of my candidate colleagues here have mentioned a number of other things that are on my list. The connection to VTA is important because that can be the last mile to the middle mile to get to the bus and then to your job and then unload the bus. So that's very important. I'd love to see a used bike marketplace sponsored by a nonprofit so that they could be very, very cheap for everybody to try out. I've been talking about scooters for a couple of years on the planning commission. It hasn't happened. There are also electric bikes that are really expensive. As Pat said, there's a lot of vehicles coming up here that are not just single occupancy vehicles. And then Greg also mentioned that we don't have enough representation for some of these regional connections. But, you know, and you've also talked about scooters, Greg, but on both those issues, you know, you've been on council for 4 years and that's not solved yet. So those are two things that I would put at the top of the list of transportation to get on right away. So you got to, you know, walk the walk, not just talk the talk. That's what I say.
Thank you. Okay. I want to thank everybody that is tuning into this. We're really enjoying the audience participation. At the end of last question, we only had 42 questions. Now we're up to 51 different questions. So please go back and check and vote. One thing, since we want to be fair to all candidates, we need questions that are specific to the entire panel, not to one or two individuals. So unfortunately, if a question is targeted at an individual, we'll be unable to ask the question because we want to give fairness to everybody. Now, we're going to try something different, something new. We're going to ask for just yes and no answers in the lightning round. Just so everybody is clear, there's only two answers, yes or no. No explanation, just yes or no. Everybody give me a thumbs up on yes or no. Okay, we're in it. So now that we're in agreement, I'll just ask if you don't have any background noise, because we want to make this quick, just unmute yourself so that we don't have to do the unmute dance, because we're going to go through this quick. And I'll just call out the name and we'll go from there. Okay, lightning round, question number 1. Will you direct the utilities department to enable an 80% reduction in the natural gas use in the next 10 years by enabling residents and businesses to convert from gas to electrical appliances as their gas power appliances fail? Yes or no round. First one is Greer Stone.
Yes.
Greg Tanaka?
Yes.
Carrie Templeton?
Yes.
Rashid Farmer?
Yes.
Pat Burt?
Yes.
Rebecca Eisenberg?
Yes.
Ed Leon?
Yes.
Stephen Lee?
Yes.
Raven Malone?
Yes.
Oh, this was good. You guys, oh man, that was so good. All right, lightning round, question number 2. Measure RR is a 1/8 cent sales tax that would provide dedicated funding for Caltrain, preventing it from shutting down, funding more equitable access and future improved service, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Are you willing to publicly endorse Measure A?
Yes.
RR.
Measure RR, I'm sorry. Greg Tanaka?
The answer is yes.
Carrie Templeton?
Choo choo. Yes.
Shiv Harma?
Yes.
Pat Burt?
Yes.
Rebecca Eisenberg?
Yes.
Ed Leon?
Yes.
Stephen Lee?
Heck yes.
Raven Malone?
Yes.
Greer Stone?
Yes.
Okay, lightning round, question 3. To date, implementation of Palo Alto's urban forest master plan has been severely underfunded. COVID-19 has imposed additional budget pressures on the city. Last May, Canopy supported adjustments to the public works urban forestry tree pruning budget in exchange for a commitment to fully fund urban forestry programs at the first opportunity. Will you make restoration of the urban forestry fund one of your highest priorities? We will start with Carrie Templeton.
Yes.
Ajit Farmer.
Yes.
Pat Burt.
Yes.
Rebecca Eisenberg.
Yes.
Ed Leon.
Yes.
Stephen Lee.
Yes.
Raven Malone.
Yes.
Greer Stone.
Yes.
Greg Tanaka.
Yes.
Thank you. Will you support some form of carbon fee or tax on natural gas by Palo Alto utilities to fund electrification of cars and homes, particularly for lower or limited income residents? Jib Farmer?
Yes.
Pat Burt?
Yes.
Rebecca Eisenberg?
Yes.
Ed Leon?
As worded, yes.
Stephen Lee?
Yes.
Raven Malone?
Yes.
Greer Stone?
Yes.
Greg Tanaka?
Yes.
Carrie Templeton?
Yes.
All right. Will you support more generation and storage of renewable energy in Palo Alto by both city utilities as well as by residents, so we can become less reliant on PG&E's grid and more resilient if there is an extended power outage? Pat Burt?
Yes.
Rebecca Eisenberg?
Yes.
Ed Leon?
Yes.
Stephen Lee?
Yes.
Raven Malone?
Yes.
Greer Stone?
Yes.
Greg Tanaka?
Yes.
Carrie Templeton?
Yes.
Ujit Farmer?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So right now, I'm gonna do what I want to call it a last call for everybody in the audience. This is your last opportunity. We're going to give you 1 more minute to get in there and vote, because after that, we're going to close up the box, because our candidates were followed the rules so well. We are actually 10 minutes ahead of time, so we will be able to ask more questions from the audience than we initially planned. So just to go over how this round works, I'll ask the question that gets the most votes. Each candidate has 1 minute. Is my timer coming? 1 minute. That will allow us to, at this point, ask, I think, 4 questions or 3 questions. So get the top 3 or 4 questions will get answered. Please stick to the 1 minute time frame, and we'll continue. Okay. The first question is from Kelsey Baines. Portland recently passed strong climate justice legislation by legalizing small multifamily dwellings, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes citywide. Would you support taking similar action in Palo Alto? Why or why not? And the first person would be Rebecca Eisenberg. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Kelsey, for that question. I really admire and am excited about what Portland has done. My answer is a strong yes. I believe that we need to enable more of these multifamily homes. I think that most of these lots in residential Palo Alto can support it. I was a big proponent of SB 1120 because it put the power in the hands of property owners to subdivide their properties or to duplex their homes, which often actually enables them to stay within the community. It is such a good measure that puts the power in property owners. I also really admire other things that Portland done that weren't in the question. Things like Portland had an extremely successful bond measure that raised a ton of money for affordable homes. I really love this question because I think that Palo Alto needs to look outside our borders to see what other cities have done successfully, and let's do what they do. Thanks.
Thank you. Ed, you're next. You have 1 minute.
In that question, was there a specific location referenced in Palo Alto? I'm sorry, in Portland?
No, it just said Portland recently passed a strong climate justice legislation. They did not give a zone.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the sort of high density housing is something that we definitely have to look at for probably entry level. Again, I'm not sure about the question in terms of if there's actually families living there or just ones or twos. But yeah, we should definitely do that. I don't know that it would be in every neighborhood or if it was just downtown, so that's why I was asking that question. But if they're reasonably affordable, that's exactly what we should be doing.
Thank you. Next candidate is Stephen Lee.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. If we're serious about addressing, reducing our carbon emissions, addressing racial and economic inequality, we need to build more housing. We need to get rid of exclusionary zoning. And then instead of just saying, no, we're not going to do it, we're afraid of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, let's do the hard work of figuring out how to make it work. I am confident we can find a way to enable us to build these types of housing in traditionally single-family neighborhoods in a way that blends in well with the existing neighborhood, and one that reduces the fears and concerns of current residents. So let's do the hard work of doing that. We also just need to reduce barriers to building dense housing along transit. And I want to go back to exclusionary zoning and say, if we enable duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, it reduces some of the pressure of building even denser or higher buildings along the periphery. If we spread them out across our community and figure out a way to allow them to blend in very well.
Thank you so much. Next candidate is Raven Malone.
Yes, absolutely. We have to allow more multifamily homes. Cities that are primarily R1 have been proven to disproportionately push out people of color, like I stated before. It's also the reason Palo Alto is so expensive. Allowing more multifamily units will help with affordability. So think of it this way, out of our first responders, only our police chief lives in the city. Everyone else lives far away, well, 30 to an hour away. And that's out of our police officers and our firefighters. Not to mention, we're losing a lot of really good teachers because they are tired of commuting or they can't afford to live here anymore, so they move. I mean, not to mention our school system, which is one of the best in the country, has been on a steady decline for the past 6 years because of this unaffordability. So absolutely, bringing on multifamily units will help with the affordability in the area, and it's needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is Greer Stone.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that we need more housing, we need more density, but we don't need to end R1 zoning to be able to do that. We have the ability to be able to do that near transit corridors and other areas around town. Pat Burt mentioned earlier that the Stanford Research Park is an area where we can create housing as well. The problem with when we're talking about ending R1 zoning and being able to create affordable housing there, that's not going to create the affordable housing. That's going to create more market rate housing. And the way the housing sector works, it's not like, okay, I'm going to take this single family lot and split it into 4, and that's going to magically make the price of each one of those individual units a quarter of that house price. It's not going to work that way. We do need more teachers. My wife and I are both teachers. We rent a 1-bedroom apartment. There is no way that we can afford anywhere near the price of a market rate home in here. We need to be able to do this by really targeting creation of these type of low income housing and housing for people like teachers.
Thank you so much. The next is Greg Tanaka.
Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for this question. We need housing of all income levels. That's the only way we're going to solve this problem. ADUs in California are kind of going in the direction of what Portland is doing. So last night I pushed successfully for looser limits on ADUs. I was able to get unanimous support, which is great. The next step really is to go further, right? To allow underground building as we do under our main residence. If you do that, it also allows underground parking, which would allow ADUs to be built without having an impact on our neighborhoods. There are incredible social benefits of having ADUs with multi-generational living. And if you look at the growth of ADUs from when I've been on council, it's been a it's been a huge success, very little complaints. This is especially true when you do it in your transit. So if you look at, since I've taken off, you look at ADU streamlining, it's now about half the amount of time, although I think we could do a lot better. Some cities have like ADU days where you get approval in 1 day. So I think this is really part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. The next candidate is Carrie Templeton.
Thank you very much. I think this is an interesting question. You know, I been on the Planning and Transportation Commission, and we haven't seen a lot of projects come by in the past year. We've had very, very few, a handful of ADUs and one development project. And we have to wonder why. And I think it really does have to do with the current zoning laws of such an extent of R1 zoning, making it illegal to do anything but a single family home on certain lots. And that's really unfortunate. That kind of goes against the way that Palo Alto thinks. We really don't want to have the government intruding so much in our lives. And I think that that's one of the reasons that the state has been trying to step in, is because we're using those current zoning laws to prevent the city, to obstruct the city from building the housing that it really needs. So I like the idea of having more tools in our toolkit. That doesn't mean we're going to eliminate single family homes, but it does mean we would have a little bit more flexibility and more tools in our toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Eugene Farmer.
Thanks. So my big worry is that this just does not go far enough. I've heard time and time again how we allow ADUs in Palo Alto. We don't have a housing problem. It's just not accurate. And so for me, like, I think that we have to build much more dense buildings. And we have many places we can do this. We have ability to do this on El Camino. Yesterday at City Council, there was a development that came in, 119 units on El Camino. It's very dense. They need additional height limits. And it was stopped because of unrealistic ideas of let's make 50% of the housing affordable. And so what will likely happen is with restrictions like that, developers will be discouraged, things won't get built, and we won't end up with housing. So to me, I think that the right solution is like we need much more dense housing, much more than triplexes and duplexes. Like we need multi-story, much denser buildings in corridors like El Camino, University Ave, San Antonio.
Thank you so much. The last candidate for this question is Pat Burt.
So to have the variety of housing types of low, medium, and high income housing, we need a variety of zonings in our city. High density in our cores. This is the principle of new urbanism, transitioning into medium density. And that's where we have the 4-unit apartment buildings in the blocks outside of the University Avenue area. And then our single family neighborhoods, which now allow 2 ADUs per unit. What SB 1120 did was allow subdivision of lots, of every lot by right, and that would allow 6 units where 1 is today. And I don't think that's either necessary to hit our housing problems or appropriate. It doesn't provide any affordable housing. What we need for affordable housing is the funding and the zoning specific for affordable housing, impact fees, and a business tax that our current council pro-development majority went against each time.
Thank you so much.
Years.
Okay, the next question is, Palo Alto set the goal of 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030, which is unlikely to be met with just incentives. So more invasive measures must be implemented if we are to take this goal seriously. Do you think we should resort to difficult restrictions or mandates in the city to meet the 80-30 goal? If so, what kind of restrictions or mandates would you support? We will start with candidate Edlinger.
Yes, I think there are a number of items that have been already put together by the city, a kind of a checklist of things to look at. And they're on a scale between moderately invasive to very invasive. An example of very invasive is banning the single occupancy vehicle. I don't think we need to go there, particularly for reasons that I mentioned before, that that's not affordable to everybody. Then there's some more in the middle that are things like giving incentives to rehab electric for gas on the homeowner, having the homeowner do it on their own, which I think is fine. Having a transition when a house is sold to requiring to put in electric appliances and things along that line. So I think in the moderate area, yeah, we should look at a lot of those things. My time's almost up. But not in the severe area at this point, and then see how we do.
Thank you. The next is Stephen Lee.
Well, I appreciate the question. This is why I said in my opening statement that the change that we need to make in this next decade will require us to make some uncomfortable decisions. While educational programs and programs designed to encourage or incentivize reductions are all very good and well and will be very important, we need leaders who aren't afraid to take bolder action and require the changes we need to make. We are simply running out of time, and our inaction or delayed action on these things is going to cost us down the road. We need to be good observers of human nature. None of us are perfect people, and none of us are going to make the dramatic changes we need to make to save our planet unless we're required to do so, or unless the cost of continuing such carbon emitting behavior becomes costly. So yes, I'm in favor of bold action. I think it's time for bold, progressive, and responsive leadership, and that's what you're going to get if you cast your vote for me this November.
Our next candidate is Raven Malone.
I guess I'm going against the grain here. I would say no. We have to keep in mind that we live in one of the most expensive places in the country. Requiring changes like that, especially requiring the residents to pay for these changes, would hurt more people financially who are already struggling to live here, and parents who are already struggling to live here to keep their kids in our school system. It's important that when we make decisions, we keep in mind the residents that we're representing as council members, and making decisions like that, I wouldn't want to risk hurting more people, especially considering it'll be a while until everyone's back on their feet after COVID. There are a lot of things that have to go into making as bold of a decision like that, and I'm against it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Greer Stone.
We're going to pick up on something that Ed was talking about, which, talking about the need to have a diverse set of tools to be able to address these problems. And that's both kind of the carrot and the stick are what we kind of need to be looking at. And when it comes to the carrot, I think those are various incentives to be able to make it easier for residents to be able to commute to work by having better, safer bike lanes, having bike boulevards that connect both north, south, east, west within Palo Alto to make that much more convenient to get around. On the stick end, let's look at the vast amount of commuters coming into Palo Alto and the office spaces here in the community. 60% of Palo Alto's greenhouse gas emissions are caused by transportation, and most of that is coming from commuters coming into Palo Alto. So requiring telecommuting, requiring offices to provide alternatives to single occupancy vehicle use through go passes and bike sharing and other tools, and banning non-residential parking permits from residential neighborhoods.
Thank you so much. We will do Greg Tanaka next.
Thank you. So thanks, Ife, for the question. On council, I did push for stricter building reach codes, so improving energy efficiency, as well as the ban for natural gas in new homes. But I think really what's important is the carrot, so to speak, versus the stick. I think it's easier we want to make it easier for people to go green, less red tape, make it easy for people to go from a gas water heater to a heat pump type water heater. And I think what's really important is we have to make sure that we don't punish the less fortunate. So I agree with what Raven said here, which is, I think a lot of people think everyone here in Palo Alto is extremely rich. And there are some really extremely rich people, but there are also a lot of people who've been hit very, very hard by this recession. Some call it depression. And so we have to keep that in mind when we look at punitive measures. Some people lost their jobs, some people have taken pay cuts. In general, I believe that it's better to partner, not punish. And I think the carrot, and what I found in life is that the carrot's much more effective than a stick.
Thank you so much. We will have Carrie Templeton next.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree with Raven and Greg. I find that my leadership style doesn't involve the stick. It's much more important to get people on board voluntarily. And that is something that is also very important to our residents in Palo Alto. And I think you'll find that most of Palo Altans want to be conscious of climate action and participate in improving our impact on the environment. So I don't think it's going to be a major lift. We do have, of course, people coming in from out of town. And like I said, that is also a leadership skill that we need to partner better with our regional transit leaders and make sure that people who come to Palo Alto for work have a way to come to Palo Alto that is green. So I think that would be my approach. I don't think I would be comfortable forcing people at this point.
Thank you so much. Then we have Ajit Farmer.
Thank you. So it is disappointing that we haven't made that much progress over the last few years. 10 years isn't that much time. And so in order to make progress, we have to get started now. there are some good things that are happening, like the cost of solar panels are going down significantly. There's federal tax credits and incentives that are expiring in the next 2 years. I think there's a lot that we can do for awareness and aggressiveness, everything from negotiating as a city together with companies like Tesla that are based here in order to create like mass installation days and reduce the price even further. I really do think that a lot of this has to do with just proximity to where you work. So now people work from home, but that's not going to be the case in 10 years. It'll probably revert to where we were a couple of years ago. So I think the density again and again, this is where we have to make it so that people can live close to where they work. And I think that if we have to make hard choices, we need to make that happen because climate change isn't a choice we have to address.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Burt.
We now know that the urgency of climate change is even more than what we thought just a few years ago. And if we didn't believe it before the last few months in these catastrophic fires, it's more present. We had everybody here tonight say that they were committed to the 80-30 goal, but just coaxing people and encouraging and hoping is not going to get us to where we have to be for future generations to protect our planet. And I've spent 30 years in environmental policy. We need a combination of incentives, of education, and of regulatory matters. We can rapidly have the commercial buildings begin a process of mandatory conversion to electrification over the next several years. Same thing with larger residential buildings, and then a series of incentives for smaller residences. And then electric vehicles, we need to have ubiquitous charging. And then we need to have this community bank concept or something like it so that we can reach low-income workers and buy clunkers off the road.
Thank you so much. Okay. And the last one of this question is Rebecca Eisenberg.
Yes, we need to have invasive measures now so our children can breathe easily. And I mean that literally. I'm a seasoned negotiator. I've pushed through difficult deals my whole life in my job. I've spent 30 years ensuring that my clients have the best deal, and I'll do that for our community in Palo Alto. The truth is that individual residents and individual workers, while their changes may make a difference, they aren't causing our problem. What's causing our problem is our biggest companies, the companies who have profited from this pandemic. These companies have not been paying a dime to Palo Alto, much less paying their fair share. The people who we need to stand up to are not people. They're our biggest businesses. We need to tax them. We need to require that they're paying their fair share. We need to tax our billionaires, possibly too, since we have the most of them per square foot in the world. And we also have to make our commercial
Thank you so much.
Too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question from Lindsay Joy this is a good one. What actions has each candidate taken to reduce their personal carbon footprint? And we will start with Stephen Lee.
So for me personally, I'm a big meat eater, so I've been trying to make better choices in my own diet. I've been switching to meat alternatives like Beyond and Impossible, which are getting quite good, and investing in those companies and supporting companies who are doing good work like that to meet consumers where they're at while reducing our carbon footprint. Just last year when my car broke down, the one that I have been driving since I was in college, I upgraded to a used Prius. And hopefully when that one breaks down, I can upgrade to an EV one. I've also just trying to make better choices. Anytime I want to go get coffee or go to the park, trying to really walk or bike there as opposed to driving. But none of us are perfect. And this goes back to the last question. We can each kind of do what we want, but unless we are forced to make these changes, right, then we're not going to get anywhere near to meeting our 80 by 30 goals. So it's not only about personal choices, it's about what decisions we are going to require as a community to reach this important objective.
Thank you so much. Rev. Malone.
So I have also reduced my meat and dairy consumptions. I'm a big fan of Beyond. I've switched from plastic to glass wherever possible, like in my bathroom for soap and So, I was using my motorcycle as my primary source of transportation since it was better than my car, but unfortunately it got stolen recently. I stopped eating almonds. They actually use a ridiculous amount of water in order to grow. I walk when going to nearby stores, and I take my little grocery bags with me instead of getting new grocery bags. There I switched to a soda stream instead of buying bottled sparkling water because sparkling water is life. And yeah, I just, and I'm looking forward to taking the adult bicycle classes so that I can feel comfortable riding a bicycle with cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next person is Greer Stone.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the benefits of having been raised in Palo Alto and having gone to our schools at Duveneck and Green and graduating from Pali is this really is a school community, and I know all the parents out there know this, that really preaches conservation and sustainability from a very young age. So I remember, from very beginning at kindergarten at Duveneck, we had a compost bucket, and so learning the importance of compost. So things like we do that. My wife and I, we have this little garden where we try our best to be able to grow fruits and vegetables. Don't rely on single-use plastic bottles. Of course, always have a reusable water bottle as well. I do my best to avoid driving as often as I can. Now, the frustration with terrible air is that makes it very difficult, but when I'm able to, biking and walking are always my favorite modes of transportation, or taking the train if we're traveling to San Jose or San Francisco.
Thank you so much. The next person is Greg Tanaka.
Thanks, Lindsay, for the question. I love this question. I really believe it's important to practice what you preach. There's a lot of people say, oh, the other person should take transit or take the bus, right? But they won't do it themselves. But for me, I think it's really important to practice what you preach. So for my own house, when I added on to it, I applied all the kind of modern green building techniques like fly ash, solar chimneys, spray foam insulation, daylighting, a whole bunch of different things. And then, like I said, 99% of the time, I will actually not drive. So how do I do? I go to SF, I fly to New York. How do I do it? Well, I take transit, I take Caltrain. It's one of the big reasons why I got an electric skateboarder, so that I could, take my skateboard onto the plane and ride it in Manhattan. So it's actually really important to practice what you preach. Even when it pours and rains, I'll bike to city council meetings. I'm the only one that does that. No one else bikes to city council meetings. And I think the other thing that's really important is, it's much easier to chuck stuff. We have kind of a disposable economy, so to speak, but I will actually try to fix.
Thank you so much. Things. Thank you. The next candidate is Carrie Templeton.
Thanks, Lindsay, for this question. It's really a fun one to think about the modifications we've made to our own lives and which are sticking. I mentioned earlier that I drove my kids. My kids go to an opt-in school across town, and it was too long when they were younger, too long for them to bike to. I spent a lot of time in my car, and I realized, that's not good for anybody. And we had an opportunity to get a used electric vehicle earlier this year, and we took advantage of it. And it does seem to be a lot more joyful for me to drive around and not worry about the greenhouse emissions. We also walk and bike when we go to the library, which is close to our house. I'm also trying for a plastic-free life at home. We're all about the mason jars now and trying to find ways to reduce the plastic in our life. We're also trying to use our appliances at off hours and charge our electric vehicle when it's not a high demand time. So things like that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ajit Farmer.
So I mentioned that I went from a car to a bike, but also my family, we bought an electric cargo bike. So they're able to go. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. So my wife and I are biking frequently all across the city. I also grow a lot of vegetables in the garden. It's one of my favorite things about living in Palo Alto. So we grow asparagus, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, carrots. It's pretty amazing, like the stuff that you can grow. And it's all delicious. So I definitely recommend people growing locally as well. In addition, I think that I generally like don't believe in a lot of consumerism or materialism. So I'm often on my Facebook Marketplace looking for goods. Palo Alto High School has had a flea market. We haven't been in a while, but we used to go to the flea market frequently with our children and let them pick out toys there. So it's basically reusing and recycling things, which all help. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The next candidate is Pat Burt.
Yes, so my wife and I bike pretty much everywhere we go in Palo Alto. Outside the city, we have a plug-in electric hybrid that is our vehicle, our car. And also in the last half dozen years, we switched to electric heating indoors as the city became a carbon neutral electricity supply. We're now preparing for an electric heat pump, which all of us should be looking at as the next generation of technology to move ourselves away from natural gas in our homes. We take transit regularly. And I just want to plug what Ajit mentioned, which is three-wheel electric cargo bikes. And those are safe for anyone at any age. And they're easy. I have a friend who has an 80-year-old parent who rides miles a day in it. And that's really something that makes biking ready for everyone.
Thank you. Can we have Rebecca Eisenberg next?
So I've been a vegetarian since age 9. When on a class field trip in 3rd grade, we went to a dairy farm. I saw the cows and I stopped eating meat. Over the past 43 years, I've become almost vegan. I also no longer buy or wear leather, not replacing it with petroleum products, but rather replacing it with sustainable products. As a mother of 2 teenagers, I'm raising 2 teens who also know how to protect the earth. We know that of the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce is the most important. The homes here are too big. We sought out the smallest we could when looking for a rental home. We drive older model electric cars, 2012 Leaf. Most of the time our family bikes. I usually walk because I have my dog. Until we rescued a cat, we actually used to have 0 in our brown bin of waste. Our compost and our blue bins are overflowing. We need to teach this to our next generation.
Thank you so much. And we're going to finish off with Ed Leon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when I did my last startup, which I'm currently in as an executive recruiter, I wanted a very short commute. So now I only have to walk from the kitchen to this office, and I have no carbon footprint whatsoever, no transportation at all. My spouse, who works a mile and a half from here, is terrified of biking, so because of the safety issues on El Camino. So if we could fix that, her footprint would go to 0, and instead she's driven 6,000 miles in the last 2 years. So that's a very sensitive point, and we follow that. When I worked in San Francisco for 2.5 years, I took the train. I ride actually for exercise and pleasure more so than for commuting. And in the winter, we keep the house freezing in here, so we don't use up too much gas.
Thank you. Okay, I have one question. I'm going to ask you to answer it really quickly because we want to be done by 8:59. This is the question. How will you on City Council help nonprofits, which generally have extremely tight budgets, upgrade and work with their facilities so that they can be part of our community in this green future? We will start with Greer Stone.
Great final question, Reverend Smith, and it's one that I know you and I both know really well. You're the chair of the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission. I'm the former chair, and this is something that I've worked with nonprofits in this town very closely, and we do need to be able to provide them more opportunities to be able to work and thrive in this community because they provide so much to our residents, and especially those most at risk. We do need to create a set of incentives and subsidies to be able to allow them to be able to have greener facilities, but also looking at ways where we can create facilities for nonprofits, green facilities for nonprofits to be able to work out of. So I think the Cubberley Community Center is going to be an incredible place. We need to be able to redevelop it, and we need to be able to make sure that there is space in Cubberley, of course, when we redevelop it, making them green buildings, and making sure we're providing space for nonprofit organizations to be able to call it home for decades to come, to be able to continue to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Greg Tanaka?
Sure. So I think there's a combination of doing incentive programs as well as grants. I push for small business grants in the city. I think the other thing that I've talked a lot about, even on the Planning Commission, is the idea of commercial BMR. So there's uses in the city, perhaps nonprofits, that are really desired. And so just like we have BMR for like housing, there's also a concept that I've been talking about, like a commercial BMR for uses that we want to see in our city. And that's how we make that viable. Because I believe that protecting the environment isn't like saying, oh, your side of the boat's sinking. Too bad. We're all in it together. We're all in the same boat, right? We're all in the same kind of spaceship Earth. And I think this kind of philosophy is what enabled me to an endorsement of twice as much versus the next closest candidate, the endorsement of the legal conservation voters. And just wanted to thank you, Reverend Smith, for making this happen, as well as all the organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Carrie Templeton.
All right, thank you. Yes, there's definitely things we can do from the city side, and several of those were just mentioned. I like the idea of focusing on having more spaces for nonprofits to rent in the city, either city-owned property or otherwise. I also think that, we're one of the most giving cities in the nation. I'm constantly amazed at what we're able to do as community members, as community leaders, in terms of giving and philanthropy. I think it would be really interesting to see if we could assess the needs of these nonprofits and try and match them with donors and sponsors to make sure those things happen, as well as doing things on the city side. So thank you.
Thank you. Ajit Farmer?
So just echoing Carrie, like we have a lot of wealthy people in Palo Alto that have a lot of generosity and a lot of nonprofit foundations themselves. So when you look at something like the Junior Museum and Zoo, it was actually made possible by a $15 million donation by the Peary Foundation, along with a lot of donations from the city. So I think we can work with some of the wealthiest people in our city who really are interested in improving climate change and reducing greenhouse gases to lift up the other nonprofits in the city. We also have very wealthy companies, and this is where I keep going, is like I think we should encourage companies and let them build in return for some of these community benefits, which I think is a win-win situation for not only providing opportunities for people in Palo Alto to make a living, but also making sure that a lot of the other organizations in Palo Alto are able to benefit as well.
Thank you. Pat Burt?
Yeah, I'd like to speak more concretely to this. The nonprofits need mechanisms to be able to fund and acquire these systems for the most part. And that's where a program like a community bank that is a combination of city funds being invested in that community bank, along with private and nonprofit funds. Interest rates are incredibly low and are expected to remain low. In conjunction, we need to build on what's called the Palo Alto Clean program, which I helped launch, which is essentially a feed-in tariff where nonprofits can sell surplus electricity back to the city at above market wholesale rates. And the community bank can also establish community solar programs where they can group together. So a church parking lot, for instance, can be used as a site where community members can invest their own dollars in a cooperative on the
Thank you so much, Pat.
site. Thanks. Sorry.
Rebecca Eisenberg?
We need to invest in our nonprofits because nonprofits invest in our community. I've sat on the board of directors of several nonprofits, including Craigslist Foundation and Legal Momentum. So I understand very well firsthand the challenges that nonprofits face. Our campaign is working closely with a member of the board of directors of one of our local area's best and most helpful and successful nonprofits, Life Moves. Due to Life Moves, tens of Thousands of homeless people have transitioned to permanent homes, and I'm committed to supporting this important work because providing assistance to our most vulnerable raises all ships. Palo Alto is uniquely positioned as one of the wealthiest cities in the world to empower our community by working closely with our nonprofit partners like Life Moves and like Dignity Moves to deliver human rights to all Palo Altans, as well as to the people who have been excluded from Palo Alto through historic racism.
Thank you so much. Ed Leon?
Yep, thanks. Yeah, it was really sad to see the nonprofits be gently relocated out of Cumberly. That's one of the uses that's, just close to my heart. I also worked on homeless things. I was on urban ministry, and at some point that was going to grow and get bigger out of just one office in the Lutheran Church. So we merged it with Life Moves so that it could have a broader access all over the peninsula. I want to give one more sort of church example following on what Pat mentioned. Sometimes you got to be creative to solve multiple problems. There's a church that was declining in attendance and therefore revenue on North California, and they applied for a controversial CUP to also be able to be a community center because there are a lot of nonprofits that were in there benefiting from that. Very, very controversial. It was in an R1 neighborhood. I thought it solved two problems. It solved the church's problems and the nonprofit problems. And so I supported it and eventually passed.
Thank you. We go to Stephen Lee.
Yeah, as a former member of the Human Relations Commission, I worked with our illustrious moderator to actually review and provide grants to our nonprofits in this community. And our city is not doing nearly enough to fund critical services. Many of these organizations have not gotten a raise on their grants in the 3 years that I've served on our commission. And that's primarily constrained by our revenue issues. I've been a big advocate in this campaign for actually doing a business tax right now, asking our larger, still profitable businesses to finally step up and pay their fair share so that we can help nonprofits, we can help small businesses, we can help families do more. So we certainly need to look at the revenue side of things. In addition, a couple of weeks ago, my campaign actually shut off fundraising because we met our internal fundraising cap. And we are now asking our supporters and the community, instead of donating more money to my campaign, to support our vital nonprofits. So you can visit StephenLee2020.org to see a list of nonprofits in our community who are doing great work and who need our help now more than ever.
Thank you so much. And final is Raven Malone.
So we do need to do more to make sure that, we're helping our nonprofits, especially when they mean so much to this community. We also need to allow incentives. I do agree with Carrie and Ajit. We should work with our nonprofits to assess their needs. And if that's funding, then we need to have funding options available to them. Even creating programs where their naming rights, like property trees or park benches, are named after the donors. We also need to help them with outreach. There are a lot of nonprofits that people don't even know exist. So we should create programs that encourage Palo Altans to take advantage of what the nonprofits have to offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would encourage the candidates to take a few minutes and look at the Q&A section. There are a lot of phenomenal questions from a very engaged electorate. And if you do, whoever gets elected, these are the issues that our community really wants to focus on. I'd like to turn it over now to Susan Chamberlain to close us out tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Smith. This has been a very inspiring and enlightening evening, and I feel a great debt of gratitude to all of you candidates for your thoughtful consideration of these really critical questions about what our city can and must and should do about climate action. I also want to thank our audience for all the great questions you asked. And if you feel inspired to jump in and take action on climate, please join us or one of our co-sponsors. And that information about how to contact us and our co-sponsors is on the Q&A at the bottom, all the contact information. So please get involved. I want to thank our 18 co-sponsors who helped support and publicize the event. Thank you with heartfelt thanks to Pastor Coloma Smith for your excellent moderating tonight, and your presence and leadership are real gifts to our city. Thank you. I want to thank the tech team from Citizens Climate Lobby who ran this Zoom event without a glitch. Unbelievable. Thank you so much. And that would be John Keller, David Kane, Angelo DiGiuli, Kieran Garwal, and then from the Palo Alto Climate Team, Kevin Ma. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues at the Palo Alto Climate Team Steering Committee who organized this event. Hillary Glenn, Debbie Mitels, and Sandra Slater. So thank you all. Good night, and don't forget to vote.